interview creative innovators and diverse change makers. I'm Deborah Levine, the editor and your podcast host. And with me today is Christopher Johnson, who is president of Global Financial Services at Pitney Bowes, where he manages the financing and lending businesses, as well as the consumer and merchant payments and risk management functions across the company. Christopher also holds leadership responsibility for Pitney Bowes Bank, a state-chartered industrial loan company. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks you for having me, Deborah. Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to hear from you and all the important work that you do. And I'm wondering if, before we start in on some of the issues that are so important today, if you could just tell us a little bit about how you became involved in all of this with the banking and financing.
Yeah, sure. So I've had several decades of history here in this particular industry. My background is through financial services, different forms of financial services. I've had the opportunity to build, develop, and scale different businesses across a couple of important companies in my career. My journey started with really kind of more in the investment management / investment banking space. Through that, I was able to get into M&A, which brought me to General Electric. And I was introduced through GE Capital in my career at GE. And that's where my sort of foundations in financial services were born. I spent a bunch of time both inside and outside of the U.S. Running varying forms of commercial financing transactions across a diversity of different customer segments, from smaller customers, larger, more sophisticated transactions in different asset classes. And then from there, went on to varying degrees of leadership and leadership responsibilities, running different businesses that we had across the globe. I also had the opportunity to work for Terex Financial Services. I led that business for several years, and most recently have been with Pitney Bowes for the last about 7 years of my career, where we have a very exciting role in the world of commerce, as well as enabling hundreds of thousands of small businesses navigate the complexities of working in a more increasingly global environment, and supporting an important sector of the economy that I think is critical for both our economy as a whole, as well as what we know as employment and big aspect of job creation out there in the market.
Well, you're doing wonderful work, and it's so important these days, especially given the difficulties accessing capital that continues to mount for small businesses, especially Black and minority-owned businesses. How can we make access to capital more equitable? Is it even possible to do?
Yeah, well, listen, I think you bring on two important comments, Deborah, and let me just shed some light, I think, on both of them independently. Let's just take the start with, as you said, small businesses and the access to capital that they have, as you know. And I think that hopefully most of your audience is aware the markets are not built evenly. Small businesses are severely underbanked as compared to large corporations and enterprises. You see there has been some growth most recently, obviously driven with the introduction of PPP money that came to market in 2020 through 2021. But if you sort of normalize for that, what I think you would see is a long history of several decades of underinvestment in the small business sector. The vast majority of the trillions of dollars in our industry are funneled through to large cap corporations. And so bank loans to large businesses have really represented the significant amount of influx into that particular market. Now, within that, I think you can start to see your comment ring true with respect to lack of parity when you think about access that minority-led companies really do face when you think about their ability to secure the critical growth capital and the liquidity that they need to invest in their businesses. Now, that starts through a lot of different means, and there's a lot of different drivers behind that, Deborah. And be happy to walk you through some of those that we're starting to explore and see.
Okay, that's just like you're doing something that is so necessary. It has been for a long time. And it's one of those where without people like you, it's not going to get done.
Well, look, I think some of the, where the big focus of where our corporation and where Pinnacle Financial Services has played in the market over the last, let's just call it better part of almost a half a century, has been really around Main Street organizations. And what I mean by Main Street organizations, small businesses, generally speaking, less than $25-ish million per annum in terms of revenue that they would generate. So we're talking about these companies in your sort of own backyard, your small community. And so, our history there shows us that, a lot of these companies need several financiers, multiple relationships to get access to the capital that they need. However, when you think about the differences between different, let's just call it, the different aspects of corporations, and those that, from a diversity standpoint, are led by underrepresented minorities, what you find is the plight is even harder, right? So, probably upwards of, the statistics say upwards of 80-ish% of those businesses find it very hard to secure the capital that they need. They're often significantly more times rejected for loans from traditional institutions. It is hard for them to grow and expand because they can't get the seed capital as well as the growth equity and the investments that they need through traditional sources. Now, when you unpack that, Deborah, I think it's important for us to understand that this is a rather, I think, as I've been looking at it and studying it more and more and engaging with these business entrepreneurs as well as business leaders and owners that are trying to navigate this, it's a lot more systemic than we may understand at first glance. Let me just give you a little color and a bit of texture underneath why it is difficult. Some of these businesses are, let's call them well positioned, that they've got seasoned leadership, folks that actually have a very good sense of a set of knowledge and capabilities to be successful. With that being said, right, if you think about how most businesses are created, how they start, where they find their beginnings and where they get the majority of their capital, at least initially, The reality is that most of that emanates from, call it familial wealth. It's you, Deborah, investing in your business. It is you and your family investing in your businesses. But most of our, diverse and minority business owners, they tend to be domiciled around cities, tend to be in more urban centers. And as a result of that, when you think about things like are you a homeowner, or are you have you made large purchases like an automobile, things of that nature, things that build your personal credit, if you will, in the traditional sense, traditional way of thinking about it. Unfortunately, what you will find is that if you live in an urban center, generally speaking, you're going to be renting more than you are owning a home. And those kinds of things, when you think about traditional credit models, unfortunately, it disadvantages those that are, some minority background and minority business owners. And so they don't have the same starting point of access to capital when you think about just that simple example as what you find as other non-minority groups that have where they have a little bit more of that background that fits the mold of traditional models of how you lend here in the U.S.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned here in the U.S. I understand that you've been abroad lines in your career, and there may be some differences in what we do here in this country than what you do abroad. Is correct?
Yeah, listen, I think it's you make a good point. If I step back for a moment and I think about diversity, it's 100% true. The old adage of the U.S. as the melting pot of the world. That is for sure. You see a different, an increasing level of diversity inside of Europe. Obviously, when you think about Western Europe, we all know it's very much more, it is diverse and people from different backgrounds. But even when you think about sort of Europe from beyond just the Western European context, there is a growing diaspora of folks moving through those particular regions. So it is becoming, for sure, more diverse. But I think that there are different elements of diversity in how our systems work as you think about different parts in the world. It is true, I've spent some time working and living outside of the United States. And one of the elements that I think is a bit of a challenge, right, that I think it's beyond just the U.S. that it will face it, is when you think about demographic pressures. And when I talk about demographic pressures, Deborah, I want your audience to understand when you think about workforce and you think about age of the workforce, right? In many ways, the U.S. Benefited a lot from what we kind of think about as the baby boom population, okay? And it had significant contributions to our economy, right? As we had their participation in the labor force. As we all know, a lot of the baby boomers have retired or are kind of in the tail end of their careers, and our population or our workforce, if you will, is starting to contract. Okay? But let me just pause there for a second and juxtapose that with different countries around the world. Okay, so if you think about Japan, which is slightly ahead of where the U.S. is in terms of that aging population, right? You've seen very similar trends of an aging population. lower workforce, numbers as they have gone through recent, call it, decade or so. China behind Japan, right? But actually not too far, right? In terms of comparison to where the U.S. is, okay, and in Western Europe, in some cases, or Europe, I should say, in general, in some cases, is ahead of the U.S. in terms of aging population, in some instances slightly behind it. But the point here that I want you and your audience to understand is, as that population ages, it creates workforce pressure, in the sense that why we talk about are there the competition and the race for employment and good employees. And you see, as you walk around the communities in which we live, there's a whole lot of help wanted signs everywhere. Okay. Now, truth is, the only way we are going to really fill, right, the job opportunity, the labor need that we have in places like the US and increasingly in other countries around the world, right? The only way we're going to satisfy those needs is if we see more inclusion of people of different races, different backgrounds into those economies. One of the reasons why the U.S. is as stronger than other countries economically today is simply because of this concept of diversity. We are bringing in people. There's more migration of people into the United States, and that has given it a stronger labor force, better demographics than what you will see in some other countries around the world. And so diversity is such a critical thing. It's not only, Deborah, the right thing to do because you're a good and decent human being to treat everybody the same, but it's important when you think about the economic consequences of not having all the same demographics as you used to have. And so as we think about, diversity inside of financial services, and you think about diversity inside of the United States, you got to think about, how do you include people into that equation so that everybody can participate. And when you unlock this idea of inclusion, you unlock this idea of participation. My gosh, Deborah, the power is so, so strong.
I appreciate that. I do see all these want ads up on places, especially restaurants and other things that provide services to the community. And I wondered, how would you recommend that business leaders implement this today? How are we going to adjust to the new realities?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting thing, right? Where we're all learning, right? And listen, I think the level of inclusion today in calendar year 2023 is much better than what we saw and what we knew if you dial back to 2010 or even calendar year 2000 and beyond that. So are we making strides? Yes, we're making strides. Okay. Is there more work to do, and is it more pressing? Yes, there is more work to do, and it is more pressing. If you think about this idea of how do you increase inclusion, right? And I'm going to give it some general concepts, and then I can talk more specifically about sort of my industry, where I grew up in financial services, and give you some color and texture around that. But in general, I think we really have to look hard at how are we, what are our practices and what are the steps that we're taking with respect to when we evaluate hiring, right? In many cases, it used to be, right, the old school way of doing it was you hire someone who basically looked like you and emulated you, right? You hired people from a certain background and a certain prototype, if you will. And I think now, when you start to want to tap into diverse markets of participation, really what you have to ask yourself is, A, what are the real skills that you need? What are the skills that are teachable? What are some of the attributes that you really need to have? So instead of necessarily writing a job description where it says, I need Deborah to have, or I want someone, looking for someone to have 7 years of service in the hospitality market. Is it that you really need, or is it, I want somebody who is a fast learner, who is a people person, who's got a great personality, and who is inviting to others, right? So this is the way that we have to challenge ourselves to think about what are the critical skills that you really need in order to have someone to participate. Secondly, it's how we show up and how we are inviting someone or some people into the roles. And so if we show up and we are somewhat not inviting with respect to the idea of change, right? Because it is different, then no, someone's not going to feel comfortable. And if someone's not going to feel comfortable and you can't empathize with that person, then there's not going to be that connection that you need. So the best employers, the ones who are working, who are winning in this, are attracting folks, are those who are creating policies, procedures, as simple as they might be, right, to be inviting in that. Now, let me give you one more, Deborah. If you think about it from the standpoint of a neighborhood in which, sort of I made my professional career in financial services, I think the conversation here is sort of threefold, okay? There is, yes, are we really challenging ourselves around what are the skills that we need? That part still holds true. Secondly, it's training, okay? So you have to invest, you have to be willing to invest in skill development and people as well. So do you have the pathways for the training and development? Do you have the programs for that so that you can help those succeed? And I think the last part of this, and this is important, I think, from a service industry standpoint, is we have to ask ourselves some hard questions, such as, right, what are we doing to invest in my case, the Black community, right? So I want to attract more Black Americans into the financial services industry. Well, it has to be an industry, it has to be perceived as an industry that is active in the community, right? And if you're active in the community, then and you're bringing in professionals, and people can see themselves into that space, then yes, you're going to see a bit of change in that context. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an example of how I think we are going to have to continue to pioneer DEI as we move forward.
Right. What do you see yourself doing, say, in about 5 years? What will this look like?
Look, I've always been fascinated with at its core the idea of helping to build and develop companies I mean that not only from a standpoint of businesses that I've led and ran, but I also mean it from the standpoint of we have an opportunity to interact and engage with clients and help them to navigate their challenges and realize their dreams and their potential that they see as they are pushing their businesses forward. For me, what I think would be really, compelling is the opportunity to continue to lead that way, to lean into, I think, the opportunities as you look at, for instance, over the last couple of years, I think the statistics are that if you look at business formation, right, business formation has been expanding, right? We've been creating more businesses. We have been shifting sort of where American population works, right? And truth be told, is the lifeblood of that economy has been really the small business, okay? And where I want to help and what I see the potential in is this idea of continuing to invest my time around small and middle market or companies, helping them to navigate the needs of the financial needs that they have, but also helping them to navigate what it takes to be successful. In many ways, the rich background and heritage that I come from the standpoint of the companies that I've had the opportunity to work with, the global experiences that I've gained, I think they've helped me to see some of the challenges, gain some really good expertise, and I can help those companies be more successful as I partner with them.
Wonderful. Um, it sounds as if you have a plan that's going to be so helpful to so many. And I think that the general economy, not just those that you help, but the general economy will be extremely, will benefit extremely well from what you're planning to do.
Well, listen, I think, Deborah, we live in a challenging time. Just in the last several years, we've recognized things that, we didn't think were, fathomable, that within the, sort of the next of the short horizon. We've seen essentially the rise of a pandemic and entering into now an endemic. We've seen the likes of super high inflation. We've seen the end of really what is a decade's worth of quantitative easing and almost a zero monetary rate policy, to now a policy of relatively high interest rates that I think are going to be here for a while. Right, we're trying to manage through how do you create a bit of a soft pitch landing inside of the market. And in the meantime, through all of this, you have the fairly robust consumer, but changing dynamics, different political outlooks and an environment. And listen, it's not the most transparent or easiest market to traverse and navigate through. And I think it's going to take people who are committed in industry to continue to lean forward and navigate or help those companies to navigate through all of this. They're going to need really committed long-term partners. I'm glad and very appreciative of the platform that I have here at Pitney Bowes and Pitney Bowes Financial Services to lead an organization that has always been committed to its community, to its customers, as well as to its employees. And through this platform, I think that we can do a lot of good, while we also work to continue to push our business forward into the next century.
I'm making notes on this. You're very articulate about it, and I really appreciate all that you do and have talked about. And I'm sure that our podcast listeners are going to be inspired by what you're doing and will be doing long term for the community and your customers and employees. And anything else you would like to add before we wrap this up? Something perhaps we haven't talked about yet?
No, I think that well, actually, let me wrap with this, Deborah. Black History Month, as I think about it, right, is now. And Black History Month, in many ways, is a celebration of our history. And that history, by the way, isn't just a celebration, Deborah, for Black Americans or Black people to celebrate by ourselves. There's been a lot of advancements, okay? And there's a lot to be proud of within, our culture. But that wouldn't have been possible also without a lot of allies, right? And so when I think about Black History Month, I think about what we've been talking about in some of the participation, gaining better DEI, which is really all about more participation, deeper participation, and inclusion, right? That's not going to happen just by itself. It's going to require, our Black people continuing to innovate, a richness of the culture underneath that, but it's also going to take the efforts of everybody, right, including a lot of the allies. I think that this is great for business. I think it's not only a celebration of the past, but it's also a reflection on the opportunities for the future. And so as I think through what people can take away from 2023 and Black History Month is, look, there is a tremendous opportunity for us, and through that opportunity, I think both from a cultural enrichment standpoint, but also through an advancement of ideas, I think there can be a significant amount of additional economic prosperity that comes from this.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I know that our podcast listeners will also. You will have your own page up on the American Diversity Report devoted to you and this podcast recording. And I look forward to sharing it with you and having you share it with others to maybe inspire them to take the path that you have.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And for having me on the program.
Pleasure, truly. And I hope that perhaps we can do this again in a year or so to see how things are.
Will do. Take care.
All right. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.